Lucia Cassu, voice teacher here for this fourth episode, the digestive system. The digestive system for you, if you are singers or teachers, it has an evident part that we use also for breathing, respiration and swallowing, that we know is directly used for voice production. I would like to talk a little larger as I do, because it will be connected, important, and especially it will have a role into our voice production from a point of view that who has knowledge of fascial system and fascial practices know quite well that can be really very important and crucial. And as usual, I will try to bridge a little gap into anatomy and traditional practices and training practices. And the scope of those episodes is to see with a more evidence-based, science-based, anatomy-informed way our practices, our trainings, and the reasons behind, and perhaps to see some correlations in mechanisms, and also what we are doing when we are doing something. So we start with the digestive system. The digestive system is also called the digestive tube, with some accessory parts. The digestive tube is exactly a tube that starts from the mouth and goes till the end. It is something like 9 meters long. It is a tube. Many doctors now say as out of the body tube, and it is exactly what it is, perhaps not for us, not yet for us. It is a place of exchange and transformation of the outside world into something for us. That can be communication, that can be hormones, that can be nutrients, of course, that can be toxins, that can be different objects coming into and going out. Very often, as we know with kids, that it's the most common thing that they go out, they don't remain inside. It can be a surgery emergency eventually, but not so common. And this is important because when we do music, when we do singing, we interact with the outside world. And this outside world, we have to see what it means. And it will be for another episode when I get more specific, but you can relay, if you think of Rick Rubin, the great producer, thinking and talking about the magic in music, about this connection, this channeling we have, that is a channeling from another point of view. One of my, not hypotheses, I think that one of the ingredients is this exchange with the outside world. We interact with this outside world quite heavily when it comes into the digestive tube. We interact also when it goes into the respiratory, as I said last time, for the lungs. And those interactions will change us, and will change how we adapt and what we understand, and in some sort also movements. But we'll get more specific. This tube is made of what? As our interface with the outsider, you have a sort of epithelium that is with some cilia in the upper part, and then it becomes another kind of epithelium, more protected, but it doesn't have the function anymore to bring back small particles from the esophagus. It becomes another kind of epithelium. You've got here, as usual, some references if you want to go deeper into it. This tube, it has some specifics. It's not all the same in the upper part, in the medium part, and in the lower part. Meaning what? Meaning that if you read one of those two articles and chapters, it's quite interesting because they come from different points of view, from different functional points of view and histological points of view. So for one, it is a membranous layer tube. For the other ones, is the pharynx is skeletal muscle structure. But it's interesting, in this other article you will find that the muscles of the pharynx is the part of the upper part from the end of the tongue and the pharynx is the mouth, if you want, till the esophagus. Sorry, I wasn't precise. The muscles of the pharynx are, yes, skeletal muscles, here defined as striated muscles. The striated muscles are the skeletal muscles and the heart muscle, with they say involuntary function, meaning that they act as the visceral muscles, and the visceral muscles are smooth muscles. And there, I don't know if it is, yes, an hypothesis, or if it is something well renowned. I will research for you, because I didn't have the time, it's not my specific expertise, but I will research and I will specify the studies that have been done on this specific, because this also for us is very important. I remind you that in the larynx we have skeletal muscles, intrinsic and extrinsic, and we train to properly use them and to properly oppose their functions, and to properly use them also to change the positions of the joints of the cartilages. And this is something very important into voice production, voice control, and our training and craft, if you want. For the pharynx is a bit the same thing. So to understand where is this control is very important. The second part, meaning from the esophagus till the anus, it will be, in the esophagus we have again both, as I said previously, into the pelvic floor, we have both smooth muscles and striated muscles, meaning skeletal muscles. And we will see when we will talk how we control those kind of muscles, the interactions we have to do, and what we have to use them for one purpose and not against the purpose of the voice. We get to the stomach and we get to the proper digestive tube, in which we have the enzymes produced by the liver and the pancreas and the bile to emulsify the fat part and to digest in the first part of our intestinal system. Then it goes to the colon and then it goes out. I will focus today on the upper part, because it's the part that we use mostly for phonation. The second part we'll get for the anatomical and structural part, since it has what it's called the peristalsis, that is a movement. And it is the movement of the smooth muscles into the intestinal tube, and also, sorry, for the stomach, to crush your food and digest properly. These movements, why I talk about them if we are talking about voice? Because you have to realize that into the body, if we have some kind of movement, this kind of movement will move basically everything. In which ratio? It can be not so big, so we can say, okay, for voice production we don't mind. It can be bigger. The vocal system, as we will make a synthesis at the end of those singular parts, you will see that it is mostly membranous, smooth muscles, what we call the fascial system. It has this insertion of the larynx, but otherwise it is mostly connected to the system of smooth muscles, and it is just one, and it moves all together. So if we want to control the voice, we have to control all the movement of the body getting into our voluntary movements to become one wave. Because if you sum two waves not in a correct way, it will not be a wave anymore. And this is where there is a separation in the thinking and the way of finding things from artists, musicians, biomechanical figures, trainers, school of thoughts in techniques for singing, and simply biology. We can get a step forward, start thinking, do they have the ones to the others as some that has a consistency for our voice production and style? In my hypothesis, in my work and my practice, absolutely yes. Since you see, and we will do that when it will be on the fascial system and osteopathic practices or soft tissues practices on voice production, you will see that some people change completely their voice, their career, their effectiveness on working on those. So it's quite difficult to say that the ratio is so minimal not to be important. It is important eventually to say when it can be the case that we work on, or where it can be the case that we don't, because they are not interfering or they are not in the center, they are not so much important in a way in which we have to think about and relate about. So the upper part. In the upper part we have, first, we have our lips. They are not exactly part of the digestive system, but they are important because they can bring the food into, and without the lips it's quite a problem. And it is part of the accessory, even if for accessory they say usually teeth, glands for salivation, and the tongue. The tongue is quite complex. As you see, it has extrinsic muscles and intrinsic muscles as the larynx. The intrinsic muscles, they change the shape of the tongue. The extrinsic muscles change the position of the tongue. It is important for articulation, it is important for swallowing, very important for swallowing. And some pattern of movements get directed when we start first swallowing, and this it will be important in one case. I was one of those. If you have a tongue tie. Tongue tie is a controversial subject, mostly due to the fact that it's lacked, as you see in this article, of enough studies to understand how much of an importance it can have for speech, for swallowing, for breastfeeding, for postural and development, maxillofacial development. I put other studies in which it seems that to cut and to correct the frenulum of the tongue, that a tongue tie or ankyloglossia is when the tongue has not enough movement because a part of the genioglossus is shortened and it's outside, and it is into the little skin that is under the tongue, or this skin under the tongue is too much in the front, so we don't have the mobility of the tongue. When we don't have the mobility of the tongue, it used to be cut at birth. At a certain time they stopped cutting it, and then it opened the discussion if it's better to cut it or not. For breastfeeding it looks like it creates a problem into the oscillation of the tongue, and the tongue can oscillate. And this oscillation, I think it's important also for voice production, for singing especially, not much for speech. But for singing it's something that we do. And if you have never done, to start doing something you've never done, you didn't adapt for, can be more complicated than if you yet had. And there we have to develop practices to find something that you didn't find previously. So yeah, that could be something of interest in. Those articles, they say that those functions, especially articulation and the speech and the clarity, gets much better. Some neck problems, some sensation of not being really well released, also after the frenulectomy. I did a frenulectomy, and some issues I had into articulation and freedom of the tones in the extreme became much better, much better, nearly immediately. I had to do many exercises about, but my voice production, tone production was much easier. Okay, so can be something that you can look at if you are in the little percentage of people with a tongue tie. The pharynx is partially part of the respiratory system, partially part of the digestive system. It starts upper with the nasopharynx, then we have the oropharynx, that is the proper mouth, and then you have the laryngopharynx. Yeah, I don't know, I wanted to control it wasn't wrong. So it is important. Why? Because it shapes how tense you are going to be into what you call usually the throat. It has a role into breathing and into the capacity of the breathing, of being a nasal breathing you are using more and changing the tension before and after. And we have to remember that from the episode on the larynx, there is a posturing of the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the larynx that is very important for voice production. So for all the nuances we are going to do and that will affect our voice, we have to take into account everything that will change this posturing. And if this posturing is changed by breathing and it's not the posturing you want, the pharynx is pretty important to determine what kind of posturing you will have while breathing. And the posturing while breathing will directly correlate with the posturing of your larynx. So this is important. And this is important also because we have to understand how we move them. They are striated, but it seems that they move like the visceral muscles. What it means that if it's true, we don't have so much the direct control. If it's not, we have a control, but at the same time, it's not exactly as the usual skeletal muscles. And this could be the reason why it's so tricky to train the pharynx, because they are constrictors. And sometimes we use the constrictors or the pharynx at the place of the posturing of the larynx. And in those we find a lot of the defaults that we don't want to have, or on the other side, the kind of sound that we have adapted to. And it's, for example, for the country music, we use more the constriction of the pharynx, but we don't want it exactly into a classical sound or into a jazz sound, because simply too much of that constriction will not give enough freedom of posturing with intrinsic and extrinsic laryngeal muscles to have the quality of tones into the extension that we need. The last thing to say is that the smooth muscles are governed by hormones, biochemicals, and nervous system that is called the autonomic nervous system, meaning that we can change the autonomic response by many factors. And this will be important because when you have to sing, if you have this wave that is into your sound, you have this peristalsis moving and your heart moving, all those are those parts that usually you call subconscious, meaning that you find yourself having them. And in my practice and in my experience, you can change them if you acknowledge them, you accept them, you put them into your sound, and then you use the correlation of the skeleton system to correlate, to change the state of the fascia and of the connective tissue. That is absolutely possible. And it's absolutely something that we do during a concert as exactly during the training. And for today, it is enough. Now the recap.